Mark of the Beast, Part 20. Gods of Thunder. Tesla said that science is but a perversion of itself, unless it has as its ultimate goal the betterment of humanity. He knew what he was talking about. His many inventions, that he saw as belonging to the whole world, were hidden, or destroyed, or metered out, so that the very few could take advantage of the many. In our series, we see that there's always elites who have hidden knowledge, and their perversion comes out and shows in their quest to become gods. We have used the mantra, remove God, replace God, become God, in order to illustrate that the mark of the beast and its image is a theme found throughout history. Nowadays, their perversion of technology, for example, is seen most obviously in their voyeurism, their surveillance, and their need for omniscience. They also seem to need to be the ones that decide who lives and who dies. And penetrating space, opening black holes, splitting atoms, exploding millions of tons of rock. Their quest for godhood has led them to create chimera superviruses and chimera creatures and super AI weapons. And finally, creating artificial intelligence in his own image and uploading his consciousness into a new heaven and a new earth called the Internet of Things. In the book of Revelation, we find many references to what sounds like mad science taking a turn for the worst. For example, we see that those who accept the mark of the beast have to deal with the side effects of tumors. Revelation 16 verse 2 says, "There fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the men which had the mark of the beast." And we see that insomnia is another side effect of that mark in Revelation 14 verse 11. "They have no rest day or night who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name." In our modern age, we don't have to search very hard to see the spike in iatrogenic diseases plaguing our country as a result of Big Pharma's hijacking of the media, the hospitals, and the universities. The sickest part of their cruel joke is that the commercials proudly proclaim that if you take their product, they will make sure that the cure is much worse than the disease. Astonishingly, the Bible predicts this state of affairs to a T, including drug makers, the word used is pharmakia, in the list of last days demons who walk the earth. These pharmakias, where we get the word pharmacist, are like the Amalekites in the book of Exodus, marauders who preyed on the sick and the weak and the stragglers. Revelation chapter 9, 18, 21, and 22 make it clear that these modern sorcerers are not the benevolent saviors which our media encourages us to worship. Pharmakia means to drug or to poison, and in ancient times they were the poisoners who provided elixirs for those seeking abortions. And they also furnished psychedelic drugs to shamans to get bombed out of their skulls and receive divine oracles arising from the abyss. Let's assume for a minute, though, that the mark of the beast does not come in a pill or a vial. Looking around, we still can find the side effects of cancer and insomnia elsewhere amongst the mad scientists' latest products. Routers, modems, cell phones, iPads, smart meters, and 5G towers are all mandatory for the coming self-driving Big Brother technocracy. And guess what? These products all cause cancer and insomnia. The Bible says plainly in Revelation chapter 16 that those of us who stay in Babylon and get the mark of the beast will, quote, gnaw their tongues for pain and blaspheme the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores. While it might sound like an exaggeration to call routers a weapon, the weaponization of microwaves is well established and frequently used to secretly combat an enemy. Havana Syndrome, for example, describes the spectrum of illnesses produced by microwave weapons, or D.E.W.s, directed energy weapons. Several embassies in Cuba during a period from 2016 to 2018 endured a prolonged plague of headaches, tinnitus, bone pain, insomnia, nervousness, irritability, and even heart issues before figuring out what the culprit was. Unfortunately, Havana Syndrome is not mass hypochondria or an isolated incident. The government has been developing what it calls psychoelectric weapons for decades now. This revelation came in an accidentally leaked FOIA request response. According to these U.S. government documents shown from the Washington State Fusion Center, law enforcement is able to use microwave weapons from towers and vans and black helicopters to lay siege to, weaken, frighten, and confuse their enemies through invisible means. Attributes of this silent attack include forced memory blanking, changes to hearing, sudden violent itching eyes, control of speech, wildly racing heart, remote induced violent rash itching, forced twitching of the arms, forced orgasm, controlled dreams, reading in the broadcasting of thoughts, and other bizarre side effects. The document even goes so far as to brag that it can now plant voices into a subject's head. While the uninitiated might still trust that their government only has a short list of enemies on which to use these silent weapons, those of us who have studied their agenda know better. The fact that the government has chosen to collect every last crumb of privacy from you should indicate that they consider you a potential enemy that they must gather intel on constantly. One can easily put two and two together and see what the technocrats have in store for us when they insist on installing 5G microwave towers every 500 feet on every street in America. Ever-present microwave weapons will be the silent, invisible government persuaders, which will make resistance and disobedience impossible. Although 5G is not ionizing radiation or radioactive radiation, it is in the microwave range. It can be adjusted and turned up and turned down remotely from 30 to 300 gigahertz frequencies in order to be as harmless as a cell phone or as caustic as a microwave oven, causing burns beneath the skin. This silent, ubiquitous torture sounds an awful lot like the stinging from Revelation chapter 9. Quote, "Then from the smoke came locusts on the earth, and they were given power like the power of scorpions of the earth. They were allowed to torment them for 5 months, but not to kill them. And their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it stings someone. And in those days, people will seek death and will not find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them." We need to face the fact that for these scientific dictator hijackers, the goal isn't to produce technology that is more helpful, more affordable, more efficient, easier, better quality, healthier, or even safe. Rather, their goal is to get more power and more control. Research funded by the foundations is only done to use social engineering to create a top-down world of predictable stability. We will see from their own writings that they have no goodwill toward their subjects, but only the obsession to progress and evolve. In their own words, we've got to get beyond freedom and dignity and submit to the collective need for them to become gods. They will cry, "Equity for all," and "broadband internet for all," and spend billions to generously supply internet infrastructure for all. But friends, do not be deceived. Their actual goal is to turn the whole planet into a digital prison, where prayer, meditation, concentration, and therefore mental resistance is futile. It will be impossible to think and pray and thrive and defend, because we will be inundated with EMF, ELF, and VLF pollution that will be constantly disrupting our brainwaves and biological rhythms. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, says in its founding document, quote, "The main goal of UNESCO is to make the maximum amount of progress in the minimum amount of time." This statement sums up our modern world's attitude towards safety and caution and consequences very well. Take your medicine now. Worry about the side effects later. Go hurtling 100 miles an hour into the darkness until you smash into something. Then simply clean up the carnage and correct your course, and do it all again. Their writings also admit that the research that the foundations will be doing might seem a little bit perverted. Quote, "Research may be perverted, and its material applications may be overvalued, yet without them we shall not advance." As we see over and over in this series, progress is done for progress's sake. And data is more important than human life. It is simply the way to evolve into an Ubermenschen God. One of the goals of UNESCO and their research foundations has always been to control nature, to be God. Once again, in UNESCO, its purpose and philosophy, we find, quote, the increase of our control over nature appears to be a necessary foundation for future progress. For these scientific dictators, every part of the world must be controlled, and nature is just another part of the world. They admit, quote, the world is potentially one and human needs are the same in every part of it. To understand it, to control it, and to enjoy it. Controlling nature and the world is a human need, according to them. It is simply a natural thing to want to do if you are on an evolutionary course to become God. Simply put, if you want to become God, then you need to perform acts of God. All ancient gods down through the ages had something to do with the weather, from Baal in Mesopotamia to Thor in Scandinavia, and Zeus and Jupiter for the Greeks and Romans. Naturally, control over the weather is a major trait of the God of Israel as well. The fundamental verses in the Bible depicting Yahweh or God as taming chaos are thought by scholars to be some of the oldest Bible passages ever spoken, predating the written scriptures by at least 1,000 years. These passages cut to the heart of what it means to be God. Themes include darkness to light, chaos to peace, splitting the elements, quieting and shutting the seas. We see Yahweh versus the Leviathan serpent, Yahweh versus the dragon Rahab. Way before Christianity, before Judaism, and even predating the Bible, these fundamental ideas defined what it meant to be God. But Revelation 13 indicates that in the last days, impostors will use weather manipulation in order to perform signs. Quote, then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. While John the Revelator on the Isle of Patmos in the year 90 AD would have had a hard time wrapping his head around impressive visions of napalm and H-bombs, this is old hat to us nowadays. And it makes you think, what have they been doing since then? After all, the UNESCO goals about control of nature were written 75 years ago, and technology has opened many doors during that time. At the most basic level, God is defined in Job chapter 9 verse 8 as he, quote, who commands the sun, who seals up the stars, who alone stretched out the heavens. But the God of Israel is no longer alone in stretching out the heavens. Our modern gods have created a weather modification device in Alaska called HARP, which heats up, stretches out, and tears holes in the ionosphere. The goal of such mad science is detailed in its patent and operating documents. Basically, they wish to use the Earth's electrical aura, or the ionosphere, as an antenna array to gather information and spread electromagnetic waves to their intended targets. This ionospheric manipulation sounds an awful lot like the 5G towers, except on a global scale. One of the patent's claims is that it can use very low frequency waves to change brain waves in ways that affect mood. Another claim is that it can steer weather systems. Weather manipulation is a topic that the mockingbird media rarely discusses, even though it's not a secret. It is the elephant in the sky that no one talks about. That being said, occasionally, the sunlight of truth does sneak through. The Discovery Channel's documentary, Owning the Weather, is a great summary of the subject, even though it's 20 years old. You can be certain of big innovations since that time. You may be surprised to know that they were steering hurricanes in the late 40s, making it snow for skiers in the 1950s, and controlling the rain in order to inundate the Viet Cong with monsoon mud in the 1960s. Nowadays, Russia, Dubai, and Saudi Arabia openly use weather manipulation in order to shape their climates and improve agricultural yields. China admitted to stopping the rain during the Olympics, and in 2020 they have taken the lead and claimed that they are now able to control weather over a vast territory the size of India by using reflector rays and aerosol injection. Although a 1977 UN General Assembly resolution called NMOD banned the use of weather manipulation after Vietnam, a provision was made that nations were allowed to experiment within their own borders, as this photo shows. The uninitiated may protest at this point and say, who would be crazy enough to mess with the weather in their own country and spray their own citizens? Sadly, the answer to that question is very easy. It's the same people who blew off a hydrogen bomb not knowing whether it would create a chain reaction that would ignite the entire Earth's atmosphere. It's the same people who then proceeded to, quote, test nuclear bombs over 2,000 times. And it's the same people who thought it might be a nice idea to detonate a nuke on the moon. We could go on. The point is that you should never underestimate the self-destructive nature of psychopaths. A UN resolution will not slow progress, and experimenting on one's own people is never contraindicated. In 1977, the U.S. Army confirmed that they had, quote, conducted 239 germ warfare tests in open air between 1949 and 1969, using the public as human guinea pigs in New York, San Francisco, Key West, and other cities. In 1950, perhaps the most heinous of these experiments conducted, called Operation Sea Spray, they sprayed San Francisco with a cloud of bacteria in which untold people got pneumonia. 11 people ended up in the hospital, and one person even died. For these psychopaths, playing God is always the right thing to do. And as Isaac Asimov famously put it, you should never let your sense of morals prevent you from doing what is right. Getting back to their need to control the weather, we see a good example of the progress on the road to controlling nature in Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. This is a declassified Air Force research paper from 1996 that enumerates the significant advancements that have taken place since the early days of Project Popeye and Project Storm Fury. Ironically, the paper contains an early section entitled, "Why Would We Want to Mess with the Weather?" This is a brilliant question with obvious answers. He who controls the weather wins. This paper is a very short and worthwhile read for anyone who doubts the intentions of the government to control nature through what they themselves call owning the weather. Owning the Weather in 2025 is chock full of references to the use of microwaves, the manipulation of the ionosphere through a global sensor array, and cloud seeding, which we will discuss presently. In case the reader had any hope that the UN weather manipulation prohibition had any power to stall these mad scientists, Owning the Weather in 2025 concludes that the UN and NATO will most likely collaborate with the research. They dispel any hope of international restrictions by saying, quote, "Our government will pursue such a policy, depending on its interests at various levels. These levels could include unilateral actions, or participation in a security framework such as NATO, or membership in an international organization such as the UN, or participation in a coalition." Perhaps even more disturbing, we find the admission that, once again, the, quote, "potential adversaries of the government are its own people." They say, quote, "In the United States, weather modification will likely become a part of a national security policy with both domestic and international applications." And they also say, quote, "Besides the significant benefits an operational capability would provide, another motivation to pursue weather modification is to deter and counter potential adversaries." Once again, we see the cowardly use of invisible weapons for silent, undeclared wars, waged under the veil of secrecy and using the convenient excuse of national security. National security, as it turns out, is the excuse used to deny the biggest elephant in the sky, a phenomena that we see almost every day of our lives called stratospheric aerosol injection. Once again, we are privileged to have a front row seat to Bible prophecy. Revelation chapter 9, verse 2 reminds us of this day. "And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit." One particularly enthusiastic Revelation 9 locust named John Bremen owned up to the government's devotion and dedication to stratospheric aerosol injection in a speech given at the Council on Foreign Relations. He admitted that no one can guess what the long-term effects of breathing nano-sized aluminum are, but he says it's a good short-term solution, and it only costs $10 billion per year. Although usually vehemently denied, discussions about geoengineering and stratospheric aerosol injection have appeared on Ellen with Al Gore and on the Bill Maher show, where he remarked that he could not believe that the answer to too much pollution was more pollution. For anyone who cares to look, there are many scholarly articles about the subject of solar geoengineering, and Harvard University, for one, has taken a lead. They actually have a solar geoengineering research program with its own website. As we said before, the way that they get around admitting to climate geoengineering and spraying the sky with aerosol injection is by saying that climate change is a national security issue. So in other words, the sun is our #1 enemy. The military is dealing with it, but it's not allowed to tell you about it because it involves national security. And if the military telegraphed their actions, their enemies would fight back. These enemies, of course, include people who like to breathe fresh air, those who grow plants, and those who like solar energy. A good example of such an enemy is Dane Wigington, a huge fan of solar power. His house was in fact on the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. However, he noticed a 30% drop in his solar power and looked into what might be blocking the sun, and he discovered that he was experiencing global dimming. That is, of course, that the sun was being conveniently blocked by pollution. This placed him on a 20-year path of discovery, which has yielded the popular website called Geoengineering Watch. With 37 million visitors, it explains any questions or doubts that you might have about geoengineering. To summarize his findings, the dust is made of nano-sized aluminum, strontium, barium, and molybdenum. These particles are far too small to be measured by an air quality meter. The particles are 0.01 nanometers, as opposed to the 0.25 nanometers rated filters. 50,000 of these nanoparticles can fit across the width of one hair. Free-form aluminum is a dangerous pollutant that causes breathing issues, brain damage, and Alzheimer's. Free aluminum is an endocrine disruptor with the potential to cause autoimmune disorders. It is highly reactive, so it doesn't occur regularly in nature, and yet it's being recorded in snowfall and rainfall and in rivers at levels thousands of times higher than expected. Sadly, though, most people do not look at the sky enough to see this abomination that is taking place. As the preacher in the book of Ecclesiastes puts it, most people are, quote, under the sun, and they never behold the sun long enough to even notice that it's being blocked out. It may not surprise you that the same guy that came up with the subdermal vaccination record identifier patches, and the same guy that got caught putting sterilant in vaccines in India, the same guy that did experiments on the world using gene-derived mosquito extinction, the same guy that came up with testicle-blasting birth control, the same guy that came up with the lab-grown breast milk and the lab-grown meat substitute, would now be the leader in the next phase, called dimming the sun. He is doing this in what is now being called green colonialism. He has a company called Scopex, which hopes to throttle the energy of the sun by flying heavy metal sunblock higher than traditional airplanes can go, using atmospheric balloons. In this way, they figure the dust will stay up there in the ionosphere longer and not require daily applications. If you feel like you've heard this one before, it's because we seem to be living in a clown world in which The Simpsons predicts our future. Why would anyone want to block out the sun? Especially since responsible green energy nations are supposed to be moving to clean, renewable solar energy. The answer to this question, of course, is the same answer that we've been seeing throughout this series. They want control. In this case, it's Bill Gates. He wants control. Control over what? Control over food production. Control over food is literally control over the world. He's putting himself up to control the amount of sunlight or energy allowed to produce food, while at the same time he is buying up most of the farmland in the United States, making him the largest farmland owner. No doubt Bill Gates, who has been very friendly toward developing GMO crops, has a GMO crop in mind that doesn't need as much sunlight as normal crops do. Once again, the idea of the sun being darkened is a theme throughout the Old Testament prophets, and is showing up throughout the New Testament as well. In Isaiah chapter 13 we read, "The sun shall be darkened." In Ezekiel 32, "I will cover the sun with a cloud." In Acts chapter 2, "The signs in the earth beneath, with blood and fire and the vapor of smoke, the sun shall be turned into darkness." And in Matthew chapter 21, "The sun will be darkened." The Bible also hints at other things that these atmospheric experiments may cause. Revelation chapter 16 verse 21 says, "And great hailstones, about 100 pounds each, fell from heaven on people, and they cursed God for the plague of the hail, because the plague was so severe." We have no idea what these experiments will lead to, or what the side effects of these experiments on the weather will yield. They may yield a permanent winter, for all we know. One thing we can be sure of, the technocrats' solution will always be far worse than the problem itself. For the scientific dictators, a crisis is not something to be solved. It is something to be used to herd their fearful sheep in a direction that yields them ever more power and control. The sad part of it all is that the solution to our problems really are quite simple, as the Bill Mollison saying goes. Though the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple. And this gives us great hope, and we can be optimistic as Christians because we know that all God has to do is come and wipe away all of these weapons and all of these manufactured crises shown. All he has to do is restore traditional morality and ancient religion. That time is soon. A warning goes out to you if you are the one causing these problems and manufacturing these crises. The Lord is coming soon. Micah chapter 1. Hear, all ye people, hearken, O earth, and all that therein is, and let the Lord be witness against you, the Lord from his holy temple. For behold, the Lord cometh forth out of his place, and will come down, and tread upon the high places of the earth. And the mountains shall be molten under him, and the valleys shall be cleft as wax before the fire, and as the waters that are poured down a steep place. The warning goes out. Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. They covet fields, and take them by violence, and houses, and take them away. So they oppress a man in his house. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, behold, against you do I devise an evil, from which ye shall not remove your necks. Be sure the evil will not go unpunished. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your own head. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. And the Lord will be in his holy temple, and all the earth will keep silent before him. We're told in Revelation that blessed are they that do his commandments, that they may have right to the tree of life, and may enter in through the gates of the city. But outside are the dogs, and the sorcerers, or pharmakia, and the whoremongers, and the murderers, and the idolaters, and whosoever loveth and maketh a lie. He said to me, it is done. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give unto him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. He that overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the fearful, and unbelieving, and the abominable, and murderers, and whoremongers, and sorcerers, or pharmakia, and idolaters, and all liars, shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire. Please join me next time as we look at Mark of the Beast, Part 21, Pharmakia.